Since she published the Poisonwood Bible, Barbara Kingsolver has not only been a best-selling novelist, but a strong moral voice for our country. She was named one of the most important writers of the 20th century by Writer's Digest, and her novels have won the National Humanities Medal, the Dayton Literary Peace Prize, and the Women's Prize. She has 2 degrees in biology and years of experience living on a farm in southern Appalachia, where she and her family raise an extensive vegetable garden and Icelandic sheep, which is one of the coolest things I've ever heard. Kingsolver consistently explores human resilience in trying times and never fails to make readers really think about the overarching issues we face within our country and in the world around us. One of the underlying questions throughout her latest novel is, how could 2 hardworking people do everything right in life and still end up destitute? In Unsheltered, Kingsolver gives us 2 heroes a century apart. Willa Knox in the present, struggling to keep her family above water in a sea of debts and a dilapidated house, and Thatcher Greenwood in the 1880s, a science teacher whose community forbids him to share Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. As Willa unearths Thatcher's story, they learn together to find comfort in family and in their shared hope for the future. Unsheltered has received starred reviews from Kirkus Reviews, Publishers Weekly, Booklist, and a prominent feature in The Guardian. As Booklist says, in this exceptionally involving and rewarding novel, Kingsolver considers how our ways of living are threatened by the changing climate and our ever-increasing pressure on the biosphere, conducting a subtle, many-stranded inquiry into the concept of shelter within 2 storylines and 2 timeframes. In conversation with Ms. Kingsolver tonight is Diane Rehm, a powerhouse in her own right. Rehm is a native Washingtonian whose talk show, The Diane Rehm Show, we all know and love, which established an international reach and weekly on-air audience of 2.8 million listeners. She is the author of 4 best-selling autobiographical books and is currently the host of the On My Mind podcast, where she converses with newsmakers, artists, writers, and thinkers. Rehm is also the Director Emerita of the Penn Faulkner Foundation and a Trustee Emerita of McDaniel College in Westminster, Maryland. Please help me welcome to the stage Diane Rehm and Barbara Kingsolver.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. Barbara said to me, I don't know how many of you can see her boots, but she said that she came prepared to hike. I came prepared to sit. So
I'm on a long book tour. She gets to go home after this. I don't.
2 very different agendas. You know, Barbara, there is so much disaster going on in our world today when we think about homelessness, earthquakes, floods, tornadoes. I mean, and yet it's as though you were thinking about the end of the world and what it would look like when you finished your last book. And now you've sort of moved right on into what could be the end of the world right now.
I'm just a disaster kind of gal. That's sort of my trademark. You know, I never went to all those writing conferences where they tell you what the market wants. I just figured I should write what I know, which is that the world has so much in it that I love, and so much loss, and that dialectic of how we hold on to what we love while we're losing so much, does turn up again and again, I guess, in my books. But you're right. As soon as I finished a novel about climate change, I looked around and I thought, well, it's not just that the sea level is rising. In so many other ways, so many kinds of familiar shelter, cultural, economic, social contracts are failing us. And this was in 2014, Little did I know.
And of course, you lead me into the very next point, which is that almost every single creature in your novel is in some way unsheltered. Talk about the characters 100 years apart.
Okay. Yeah, this, well, given that I wanted to write about the end of the world as we know it, of course, what a novelist really can do is write about people and the human animal, the human psyche, and our behavior and what we do. And I was watching these different responses people have when we feel insecure, when we feel threatened, when we feel there's not enough to go around. Do we form communities and embrace and help each other, or do we get grabby? And do we say, me first, mine only? Do we look around for the biggest bully to protect what we have? Yes, sometimes we do.
She does.
So I thought it would be interesting to write about this. I think of it as sort of in intellectual terms as paradigm shift. How do we behave when all of the rules we've been following to be good citizens of the world suddenly don't seem to work anymore? Basic things like there will be a job at the end of the college degree.
Tenure.
Right. There will be tenure at the end of the track. There will be a pension at the end of the career. There will be good health care. Even things like there will be ice on the poles. There will always be more fish in the sea. All of these things that so many of us grew up just trusting have been pulled out from under our feet. This is a moment of crisis. So how do you write about a crisis when you're living inside it? It's hard to see it accurately unless you can step outside. And I thought an interesting way to step outside, and if an interesting device for a novel, would be choose some other time in history when people felt that all their familiar shelters were failing them. So I chose, there were, I could have, gone back to the fall of the Roman Empire, but that's too far. And anyway, I like to set my novels in the United States of America. And when you look at what was happening here, they had it pretty well here. They were doing okay here at the fall of the Roman Empire. Come to think of it. So they probably wish that it would just fall completely and stay there. Anyway, I digress.
Why don't you tell us first about Willa? Because she is someone we really can hang on to and identify with in her confusion, her sadness, her empathy, her understanding.
And her sense of being unsheltered.
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay, so yes, as Diane suggested, this novel is set in two different time periods. There are two sets of characters. One is the present, and one is not the Roman Empire. We'll get to what it was. But in the, and I thought, I'll just say that I thought that I would create these two sets of characters in two different times and put them in one house. And then, of course, have the house falling down on their heads, because that's what I like to do. So Willa is the the protagonist of the modern story, the contemporary story. She's done everything. She's tried to play by the rules. She was probably a Girl Scout. She got the degree. She supported her husband. Through his degree, they followed his tenure track. She's worked as a journalist. She did she did her job well. She had a secure position as an editor in a magazine, and then the magazine folded. So here she is at mid-50s with no career, because mid-50s journalist is sort of like picnic lightning. It's not a happy place to be right in the modern world. And let me tell you, I've had so many interviews. You do a lot of interviews for a book, and so many begin with, "I loved this book. I'm a journalist. I'm a female journalist in my 50s, and my magazine just folded." Okay, I got this one. So she's also trying to hold her family together. She has 2 kids in their 20s who have, one of them is the golden boy. He went to Stanford, he went to Harvard Business. He should be really employable, but he has enormous debts. And other problems.
And other problems. Which show up early
right
on
away
in the book.
Yeah, right. As you do. When you buy an ebook now, you get 30 pages to decide. The pressure is on.
Yeah. You bet.
I am conscious of that. So much has to happen in the first 30 pages. So yes, we have a death. We have death and disaster. But go ahead.
Willa's husband,
Yano.
Yano, beautiful Greek name with a
beautiful man.
A rather negative father, Nick, who is
Yano's
dying.
father, the Willa's father. So this is the household. Willa lives with her husband, who, after chasing tenure and finally getting tenure, his college folded.
This too happens.
This all happens.
Really?
Nick, the father-in-law, who's just a grump and a sort of a walking Titanic of pre-existing conditions. I think she describes him to the triage nurse, and also he has this effluent of obscenity just rolling off of him. And so he's living
worst language you've ever heard.
Yeah, this will not be adopted into the AP English, high school English. My husband pointed this out to me in the first draft. He said, "You lost that one." There's some really bad words in there. But sorry, maybe we could make the expurgated edition or something.
We don't need to. Perfect to character.
So there's Nick, who's just a mess. There's Yano, who has had to take this adjunct position. If any of you know what that means, it means it doesn't pay very much. At this point in his career, he's had to take this position very much beneath him. She's got the one son who's got a lot of debts, and she's got this daughter, Tig, who is just a maverick. She just is as my mother used to say about me, if you threw her in the water, in the river, she would float upstream. That's Tig. She's just oppositional. She dropped out of college to go occupy Wall Street. And so now she, because of various circumstances, is also living with them. They've inherited this old brick house in Vineland, New Jersey, and here they are. And it's really incumbent on Willa to try to hold this family together. So that's where we begin, with the contractor saying, she's called the contractor because she thinks she might have some leakage problems, and the first words are, "The best thing to do with this house is tear it down." So there we are.
Now, take us back 100 years in the novel, where we meet another person who is struggling as a teacher, but this is in the era where Darwin is making an appearance and creating so much controversy and negativity that this is the predecessor to the Scopes trial.
Right. This is so for my previous historical moment of crisis, I chose around 1870. The country had just literally broken in two, had a war. The war was ended by treaty, but not in people's hearts. It was fully as polarized as it is now, interestingly, along very similar cultural and geographic lines. And I'm going to tell you, because I live in southwestern Virginia, and so I know the territory, the cultural territory. The slavery question absolutely is settled, but the divides of that war were went well beyond that. It was urban versus rural. It was agrarian versus industrial. It was sort of who owns the culture, who gets to decide what it means to be an American. Those divides are still with us. And so I thought it would be interesting to look at an earlier time when this country was so fractured, nobody could figure out how to put these two halves of the country back together. And into that mess walks Charles Darwin. Well, he didn't walk. He sent books, 2 of them. He published 2 books. Bless his heart, Darwin was just such a sweet guy. He really was a gentle, sweet, religious man with 11 darling children. And he was a thoughtful man, and he spent 33 years carefully observing the world. And he came to the conclusion, after 33 years, that the laws of nature apply universally. That's all he was saying, that the same laws of nature that apply to a squirrel or a pine tree or a turtle also apply to humans, that we are of this world rather than having been put here to be in charge and to rule it. We're all kind of being ruled by the laws of natural selection and physiology and geology and physics. It doesn't seem like a big deal, right? It was such a big deal. Thank goodness there was no internet. He got trolled. He was so reviled. He was so hated. It completely surprised him. He was sort of like, well, I've written this out really carefully in these 2 really long books. And he even kind of left out humans in the first book altogether. He didn't even want to go there. But he just thought, they'll get this, right? He was so hated, and it was so disorienting to people. He got hate mail from Emily Dickinson. That's how bad it was. Poor guy. So I thought, that right there, that's a moment. People felt so disoriented in their universe that it must have felt, much as it feels now, that all the rules that we've all believed in are just falling away from us. And so I created this set of characters in that time, living also in the same place, in the same house. Also,
The falling down
house. It was already falling down then, yeah. So I used some real historical characters, and I invented some characters as well. But I like to do that. I like to mix it up. But and I'll get to, probably she'll ask me, how you got to Vineland anyway. But Thatcher Greenwood is a young, sort of 30-ish man who has he's gotten an education. He came from a difficult background, but he went to Boston during the war, and he got educated as a scientist. He married this hot babe, this 20-year-old Rosie. He just can't
her nose in the
air. But she's, he just can't believe this gorgeous, young lady fell for him. And she has some baggage, much like Willa. She has this mother-in-law who is described as a corseted bulwark in a florid mutton-chopped gown. And she also has her nose in the air. And they're very acquisitional. They want material things. They want material success. And then there's this kid, sister, Polly, who's 12. Rose is 20. Her sister is 12. And Polly, likewise, if you threw her in the river, up she'd go. She's also, she's a pistol. So Thatcher is trying to hold it all together. He's gotten this gig. He's so thrilled. He's gotten hired in the Vineland High School to teach high school science. It was there were only 12 high schools in the country at that time, so it was a very big deal for him to teach in high school.
And how many in Vineland? Just
the one. Yeah, just the one. And there weren't very many students either, because most young people, but it was mostly a working class town, and so most kids or young humans, by the time they got to age 14, really needed to be at work. So only a few of the scions of this town got to go to high school, but he's teaching high school. He's just read these 2 books by Darwin. He's on fire. He's so excited. He has a unifying theory. He feels like he can really teach these kids how to understand the world in a new way that's going to help their parents, the whole society kind of move into a new world, cast away some of the old rules and learn new ones. Ixnay on that. That's not going to happen.
Ixnay because
the principal says we don't do that sort of thing. That's,
God.
Yeah, God
is the only.
Yes, he's also the principal, as it was, as they were in those days, was kind of into. Was highly suspicious of the scientific method. He didn't really want Thatcher's students to go outside, for example. Observation was dangerous.
Literally. He would not let them look at the ants.
They couldn't go across the
flora.
street and collect acorns. The principal wanted these kids to sit in the classroom and memorize poetry about nature. So, and that was, and this is not, that's really that was the approach. Scientific method was a scary thing.
So there is Thatcher dealing with an unforgiving wife who wants more, an unforgiving mother-in-law who certainly wants more, and Thatcher who wants a great deal more understanding for his students of the world. And his house, the same house in which Willa and her family are living 100 years later, is falling down around him. He has no money. He has no tenure. He has a 1-year contract.
Right.
And if he doesn't do as the principal says,
he's out.
He's lost.
Yeah, and this would not go down well with Rosie.
Isn't this mind of this novelist absolutely fabulous? It's just fabulous. It really is. It really is.
Well, thank you, but we're only 30 pages in.
Yeah.
Well, a little more. But, I wanted to say, it just sounds, now as we're describing it, I'm thinking, why would you want to read this book? It sounds all terrible. But I wanted to set up, these two sort of experiments with these people who were having to deal with a complete paradigm shift, and then give them ways through it so that you would find something interesting to read about rather than throwing the book across the room.
In addition to Charles Darwin, who we don't, of course, meet in person, there is Mary Treat, a real-life figure who lives next door to Thatcher. Tell us about Mary Treat, who she was in real life, and her communications with Charles Darwin.
And also, perhaps you might want to know, how'd she get in this novel?
Absolutely.
What is she doing there? Well, I for a couple of years, this was a novel in search of a setting, because I'd set up this device in my mind, these sets of people in these times, living in one house, and I wanted to find a genuine historical figure that I could bring into this story, who was an advocate, a champion of Darwin's thinking, someone that I could bring into this novel to really represent the new paradigm, who would really have a dog in this fight. Somebody who originally I thought about putting Darwin in the novel, but I already told you that I have to set it in the United States of America. I would have to put him on a ark or something. No, I wanted it to be historically accurate and interesting, and so I read a whole lot about American scientists of the 1870s who were corresponding with Darwin and kind of trying to promote his ideas on this side of the Atlantic. And there were not very many. There was Asa Gray at Harvard in Boston, who was very well known, and some of his friends and acolytes and colleagues, and I was reading about them and kind of auditioning for them for the role of appearing in this novel. None of them quite did it, and then I just ran across a name I had never encountered before, Mary Treat, as an important correspondent of Darwin who did experiments with him and for him, kind of testing out his hypotheses and writing to him. I'd never heard of her before, went looking. No one's ever written a biography of her. She's just never really made it into the record because she's female. She was a prolific writer. She wrote many books and many scientific articles, and also she wrote for the popular press about science and nature. She was a naturalist, botanist, entomologist, and really self-taught, because in those days women weren't allowed to go to college. She went to finishing school, where you learn how to curtsy. That's what she got to do. But she was just one of those women who just hiked up her long dress, tucked it into her waistband and went tromping in the woods looking at insects and just learning about nature, much as Darwin did. And she left this large body of work in print and nothing about herself. Wow. So I thought, and the only personal thing I could find out about her was that she had moved to Vineland, New Jersey, and had lived there for about 20 years when she was most active as a scientist.
So here is a conversation between Mary Treat and Thatcher Greenwood.
Okay, so she's living next door to Thatcher, and he comes looking for the dogs. They've run away or something. He has dogs.
And he first spots her
lying face down in the grass. The little Rosie is looking out the window saying, "She's lying on the grass. She's looking at ants," and so breathless intrigue. So he has to wander over there one day, knocks on the door, and then they get into a conversation. And how can I set this up? Pretty soon discovers that she agrees with him that he should be teaching natural selection and the ideas of Charles Darwin in the high school. She's got his back, even though she really can't help him with the principle, but she says, yeah, you got to do this. But they're just Thatcher's been kind of lonely, you gather, this is not a marriage of the mind that he's in. And so they just fall into conversation. They become friends very quickly, and they discover they have this passion in common of observing the natural world. So And, he's just said, he's probably going to lose his job if he's honest in his work. And she can't deny that that's probably true. He says to her, and I will warn you that in the 19th century, people spoke a little differently, just so you know. We're beyond 30 pages in. You've bought the book. Sorry, you're with me here. You and I are not like other people, he ventured. We perceive infinite nature as a fascination, not a threat to our sovereignty. But if that sense of unity in all life is not already lodged in a person's psyche, I'm not certain it can ever be taught. And Mary says, you are a teacher of natural sciences, are you not? I am. Also an employee and head of a family. As it happens, a family in dire need of costly home repair. I have inherited a flawed house and find myself pledged to uphold it. If I should lose my home and vocation, he found it difficult to go on. Since that awful moment with Rose, the day he told her, he had resisted believing a truth he now saw plainly. Mrs. Treat waited for him to say it. If I lose my position here and fail to find means for preserving our home, I'm sorry to say my wife would probably follow. I would lose her also. I can see no happy end for myself in noble crusades. Mrs. Treat looked him directly in the eye. Mr. Greenwood, those are qualities personal to you. They have no bearing on the truth. Such words, and yet she'd spoken them without a hint of chastisement, only as one scientist to another. Whatever else he might be, she expected him to be rational. Of course, he said, you observe the situation correctly. Now she leaned toward him, guileless as a girl in her confidence. We are given to live in a remarkable time. When the nuisance of old mythologies falls away from us, we may see with new eyes. Falls away, he said, or is torn. The old mythologies are a comfort to many. But we are creatures like any other. Mr. Darwin's truth is inarguable. And because it is true, we will argue against it as creatures do. Our eyes are not new, nor are our teeth and claws. I'm afraid I foresee a great burrowing back toward our old supremacies, Mrs. Treat. No creature is easily coerced to live without its shelter. Without shelter, she said, we stand in daylight. Without shelter, we feel ourselves likely to die.
Beautiful. So we move into the 20th century, and indeed the 21st, and you see and read in this book a great deal that sounds like present day. You quote, but never name, a candidate for president who says he could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot someone and never be arrested.
Any resemblance to persons living or dead is purely coincidental. I want to get those tweets.
So did you decide you wanted to be absolutely explicit in this novel about this particular president? And if so, why?
Well, he just kind of happened, didn't he? It's so interesting because I had found my setting because I found Mary Treat, I found her papers,
Right.
and I should also add, when I called the Historical Society that had her archives, they said, you got to come and look at this. And so I went to Vineland, New Jersey, and discovered not only a fabulous character in Mary Treat, who was a really interesting woman. She had a crazy husband who ran off to New York after a suffragette, who was a champion of free love, and all these really interesting people around her, and that in fact the town of Vineland was established really and truly in 1861 as a utopian community. So what could be more perfect as a setting of my novel to create or to let you look at, to invite you into the Victorian notion of utopia, which by the way involved the working class people doing all the work, and the philosophers and ladies having this nice lecture series. And everybody thought, everybody top to bottom thought, this is an ideal world. Except some of us are breaking our backs and getting our farms repossessed. But this guy, Charles Landis, who founded this utopia, made a giant main street down the middle of it named Landis Avenue. He had this funny hair, ruddy cheeks, big ego. He founded this town completely, all the truth was invented by him. He established a newspaper, himself as editor, wrote every word in it and published it. He owned everything in the town and used his position as mayor to improve all of his own business prospects. Wow. So this was all real. This is a real character. And people the more scared they got, the more they cleaved to him, or at least some of them did. And there's this dichotomy in the town. There's restiveness. There's this alternative newspaper, this editor publishing what gets called artificial news. It was just too good to be true. And so as I'm researching this place and thinking, how interesting would it be to look at how we behave in times of crisis and how we, what kind of leaders do we turn to when we want, America to be what it used to be before these scary ideas came up. Well, as I'm writing, I'm writing in real time as the primaries are coming on to the horizon, and I was looking at this whole new kind of leadership, if you can call it that, a new style of
capturing the people.
Capturing the people, thank you. And I just started writing and just thought, wonder where this goes. And so Willa is watching. Nick, of course, is, her father, grumpy father-in-law, has his idea of heaven is to have Fox News blasting all the time, at full volume because he's deaf. She can't stand it, and so their conversations become about the primaries, and she's saying, this guy disqualifies him every time he opens his mouth. He'll go away. And Nick is saying he's our guy. And so I'm just writing and thinking I was writing my first draft sort of in that from the summer before the conventions through the conventions, just watching this experiment that I thought I had invented playing itself out. And I was thinking, two possibilities. By the time this book comes out, because it takes, it's going to take me another year to, finish, just do all the revisions, and then another year for it to be published. So 2 years hence, nobody will even remember this nonsense, or else they will. So I guess good for the book, bad for the world. Here we are.
All right. And we have arrived at that point where if you would like to ask a question, we do have a microphone here, and we are recording this for my podcast called On My Mind. If you haven't tuned in, I hope you will. So if you will please raise your hand, and someone with a microphone will approach you and will get you on mic. Thank you. We have a question right here at the front. Would you be good enough to stand? Thank you.
So there's this moment, you just mentioned Nick, who is sort of everybody's racist grandpa or racist uncle, but there's this moment in the book with him where she's at her most frustrated with him, but he also has this incredible vulnerability, and she glimpses that, and it's really touching moment. And I was wondering if there were, it was a good reminder, right, as we're all sort of like locked into our sides, that there's humanity on every side. And I was wondering if there was anyone in particular or multiple particular people in your life that let you sort of seed in that tiny human little moment.
Well, yes, of course there are. And thank you for pointing this out, because after I set up these households of characters who are really at odds with each other in many different ways, and
politically, emotionally,
emotionally, politically, in terms of sort of acquisition, materially, they disagree with each other fundamentally in many ways. And of course, this is what we do as novelists. We set up a microcosm as a nation, a family. Everything in a novel stands for something bigger. You knew that. Your English teachers told you that. So in Willa's family, which is, the Fox News NPR family, nation, I had to love everybody because as a novelist, when I'm creating characters, I have to bring them to you from the inside out. In order for them to be convincing, I have to know really what it feels like to be that person. And everybody thinks he or she is right? That's the starting point. So I had to get from me to there before I can really successfully and in any sort of rich and convincing way bring you a character. So
Did that mean you listened to Sean Hannity and watched Fox News?
That research, yes. I mean, in my previous novel, which involved a lot of an evangelical church as kind of the center of flight behavior, I had to go to Six Flags Over Jesus. I had to do that. I had to risk getting saved again and again. So, am I? You decide. So, yeah, of course. Yes, I had to know what Nick was listening to. And I also listened to my neighbors. And none of my neighbors is Nick. But everybody, I live in the reddest part of a blue state. It's all really purple, you know that. But I have many people in my community, in my neighborhood, who vote differently, and they are kind and good people, and I have relationships with them, and I just, even without the extra duty of being a novelist doing her research, I try to listen, but I tried especially hard to think, okay, what so much behavior is driven by fear. What are you afraid of? And I kept hearing this thing about it's my turn and people are cutting ahead of me in line, and and I've lost so much, but this is the small thing I have left, especially if I'm nearing the end of my life, and I can see that, and I'm not going to get there because somebody else was allowed, to like get ahead. I had to really feel that fear and understand it in order to bring you Nick. And even though, Willa doesn't most of the time can't stand him, even as she's pushing his wheelchair around and he's like using all the racist epithets. And, she's in this position where she has to keep him alive, but she would really rather not. But surprisingly, her daughter Tig, with whom she always fights, Tig is the most patient with Papu. She's the one who can deal with him and change his bandages and give him his insulin and stuff. And so, I started sort of cross-pollinating this family, but I could only do that once I loved everybody in it. That's the novelist's job. And so when people ask, as sometimes they do, which character is you? The answer is, you don't get this at all.
Right.
Not at all. Yeah. I'm nowhere. I have to put myself away. The rule, there are many rules, number one, of being a fiction writer. The first one is sit your butt in a chair and stay there. But it's so important for me to put myself aside and understand these characters from the inside so that I can bring you there, because this is the business of empathy. That was a very long answer, but I hope it was useful.
Good. Second question.
You really wouldn't have had to go back to the 1870s to find people who don't believe in Charles Darwin's origin of species. Did it ever occur to you to have identical struggles in the two timelines?
It did, and yet that would have been a bit of a distraction. I know what you're saying, because we're still fighting the textbook fight to get evolution in the curriculum in many parts of the country. However, it's different now. And nowadays, interestingly, when people say they don't believe in evolution, they really don't know what they know they're supposed to say that, but they don't know what evolution is. If you sat down with them, as Thatcher does in this novel, he has this debate, and he says, "Well, I just want to give you 4 propositions. One is that, I won't go through them all, but that everything living has more offspring than will survive. Disagree? No, you can't disagree with that. 2, that they're all a little different. Agree or disagree? Agree. So, there are 4 of them, and when you get to 4, then if you agree with all of them, you agree that natural selection is taking place on the earth and that species are evolving. That's how it happens. It's really very simple. And in modern times, the fight is really it's more of a semantic problem of people wanting to shelter their kids from a kind of language, learning a kind of language that will sort of enlighten them, take them away from the Bible. It was so different in the 1870s because people were actually much better educated, but they also really did believe things like, all of the animals got from Mount Ararat, where the ark landed after the waters receded. How did they get from there to North America? Well, there were angel bridges or something like that. I mean, in modern times, people are not, saying this stuff. So it was different. I hope that's a decent answer.
I think we have time for 2 more questions.
Yes. So speaking of character development, is there a character or a group of characters that you like the most?
I love them all. They're like my children. I have to love them equally.
One storyline?
No, I mean, I get so invested in all of it. I have to go and live with these people. I mean, it is like a marriage. You get in there, you got to make it work. Short stories, that's like dating, Try it out, done. But I have to invest myself so deeply in these characters, in these stories, and their lives for a period of years that when it's over, there is a kind of postpartum depression. I miss them. I'm sad. My family is happy to have me back. But they do become they do become very real to me, and I mean, because I'm spending most of my time with them. I go into my office and I play with my imaginary friends all day, and so they are for me very. I have to develop them fully. I have to know a lot more about them than you do. In order for me to begin to sort of give them to you in a way that is so convincing. Even though I begin with plot, I begin with what they have to do, and then I invent people who will do what I need them to do, and then I work backwards and I give them damage. I'm like a therapist in reverse.
One last question.
It's been 30 years since the Bean Trees was published. I'm
Yes.
wondering if those characters somehow maybe rose a little bit, or the characters in the curve.
I'm sorry, could you repeat slowly?
Your characters in the Bean Trees, do those pop up at all with it being about 30 years?
Maybe I would just broaden the question. Do characters from previous novels ever kind of pop up? This is a drinking game at my house. We try. Imagine, write the story that puts Rachel from the Poisonwood Bible with Eddie Bondo from Prodigal Summer. Just like try to create a story that'll get all these characters together. I mean, it's kind of fun, but no. I mean, when I'm finished with them, I'm finished, and I'm never going to write a sequel to anything. That's not what I do. I have to stay. I have to stay on the edge of my seat. So every time I write a novel, it has to be completely new, something that I'm really scared out of my mind I'm not going to be able to pull off.
I have one last paragraph to read because this is an issue that means a great deal to me, and I would like your thoughts on it. You write toward the end of the book, the departure no one could talk about was Dixie's, and that's the beloved dog.
Who's at the end of her life.
You say she would not rise again. Every few hours, Willa carried her outside to urinate and they have a look at the sky. And when food was placed in front of her, she managed to eat a little. Willa knew this wasn't a life. Soon they would put her down and bury her under the tree, the one where she peed. Willa could see that for most thoughtful creatures, this was a positive choice. My question to you, considering how thoughtfully you have portrayed Dixie's decline, that I wonder how you feel about medical aid in dying for human beings.
Well, it is a little ambiguous, but I did write there that for most thoughtful creatures, this is a positive choice. I give you that to interpret as you will.
Thank you. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And thank you all. You've been wonderful.
Could I just... Sorry to interrupt your thunderous applause. I would just like to wind up with one other thing. There's this election coming up. Okay, it has to be okay. I'm a Virginian. Who here is a Virginian? Okay, hey, a lot of you. It is. I have to say, it's rather refreshing to be in this city, not on the lawn protesting anything, not wearing a hat or it. It's different. It's been a while. I know because you're here that you are people who read fiction. You are empathetic people. You can imagine the theoretical stranger. You are capable of communicating with people different from you. You know how to make America great again. And so every single one of you, I am requiring you to go to a voting booth. Is there anybody here who's not planning to vote? Okay, if so, raise your hand, and I would like the people next to you to take custody of you just for a couple of weeks. Please do this for all of us. We need people with hearts to go to the voting booth soon. Thank you very much. Thank you so much.